Hello and welcome to Wrestling and Everything, Coast to Coast, with your host, Buddy Sotelo, Esquire, and effervescent Evan Ginsberg, the writer and author and movie producer kind of guy. And we have also wrestling's premier photographer, Dr. Mike Leno, and we have another doctor in the house. So I should to ask you guys, it hurts when I do this, and you got to tell me say, well, then stop doing that, because that's the number one advice the doctors can give. Dr. Jeremy Housewright, and welcome to our program tonight. So if he's your guest, Mike, why don't you introduce Dr. Jeremy to the fans?
All right. Well, Jeremy is a man of many talents. I don't know if he could help you with that situation, but he's in the great St. Louis area on stl.com, the Call newspaper, sports, Fuel, that's with the period between each of the letters, FUEL Sports Network. And we had him on last year. I forget if it was in the summer, for the love of the show. Stories from pro wrestling fans. He's out now with the fantastic sequel, and the only guy doing any kind of literature on wrestling fans themselves, for the love of the show too. More stories from pro wrestling fans. Dr. Jeremy Housewright will give all his things. I can't believe tonight is NBA Finals match 2. I don't know if the Stanley Cup is going on, Stanley Tucci's Italy series, the Tony Awards, 2 nights of wrestling. I want to ask Jeremy, though, before we get into how great his books are and how revolutionary they are, is I realize Tony Khan would not want to run his Collision show Saturday against, well, there's 2 WWE pay-per-views, fantastic Lucha one and the so-so Money in the Bank. So 4 hours of wrestling from, and I love AEW, but 2's enough on Wednesday, and next week 4 as well. That's after putting up, all these months with 3 hours of SmackDown. I mean, there's wrestling every single night. How do you, I asked this from a lot of friends, Jeremy, how do you time budget? So, I mean, do you watch all of these stuff? I mean, TNA's had a pay-per-view Friday that was great, and nobody's talking about it because of all this other stuff going on. How do you juggle your time to not just the TV shows, but all these PLEs, pay-per-views?
It's tough. I'll admit I don't watch all of it. I don't have the time. And so I really got to pick and choose what's, most interesting to me and what I think I'll enjoy the most. So it can be tough at times. If I find out there was something very good that I missed, I will go back and watch it when I have time. But yeah, I rarely get to watch everything live. I used to be a diehard SmackDown watcher, and I find myself now on Friday nights rarely sitting through an entire SmackDown just because I don't have the time, or just
you got Pacers games to watch.
Yeah,
you got Pacers games to watch.
Yeah. And very exciting. That guy's the new superstar. Before I forget, too, your eyes aren't deceiving you. Evan is pictured in front of his fantastic book, Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets. And a lot of our wonderful friends are on there. I just noticed finally now, next to Nicole Bass, that's John Lennon, right, Ev?
Yeah.
Pretty amazing. Nicolas Cage down at the lower right. Valiant
Brothers.
Who's the blonde girl with the side boob next to the Valiants, next to Johnny?
That's Seika, who lives in the St. Louis area. Yeah,
wonderful
friend of mine.
Yeah.
So Jeremy, please,
Jeremy.
tell us.
Yeah, sure.
Tell us more about your overall background, because it's the first time you've been on the show, and what got you started in professional wrestling and your love of wrestling.
So I've been a journalist for, I guess, since I was 18. I got my start covering high school sports on Friday nights. I would cover high school football right out of high school. That I was hired by a small publication called the Suburban Journals, which was at that time owned by the St. Louis Post-Dispatch. It ceased to exist a few years after that, and I got a full-time sports writer job right out of college. while I was in college, I got into entertainment writing. I was a lifestyle editor at SIUE, Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, which made the NCAA tournament for the first time in school history this year. So that's our claim to fame. But yeah, so I've covered, you know, everything from movie premieres to professional sporting events, and I've been a pro wrestling fan my entire life. I went to my first show when I was 7 years old at the old Kiel Opera House here in St. Louis. My grandfather took me, and I still have the ticket stub. And I believe the main event was Hulk Hogan versus Paul Orndorff that evening. So I've been a fan ever since, and I love it. And I love, you know, writing sports journalism. Regardless, I still write high school sports because I find it fun to just to get to cover a lot of the athletic events that are around St. Louis, and it feels like it keeps me young in a way. So that's why I do it still.
Jeremy, now the Post-Dispatch, Evan Ginsberg, who I must have had you on the other show last year because we were talking about that. And at the Kiel, I wish you would have seen the stuff that I got to see fairly regularly coming into the Kiel, which was why it was really within the U.S. confines my favorite territory of all the ones I was blessed to have shot in the 70s, etc. And I wish Hogan Orndorff, put that aside for Briscoe Dory Jr. That's the shit. That's the real deal. Evan helped me with my 1992 Sam Munchnick 3-day weekend for the boys, where we let in the fans. And the Post-Dispatch, you know, we had Sam Munchnick's family there. He was ill, so we only had him by speakerphone talking to the audience.
Sure.
On day 3 of the 3 days. He was fully affiliated with that because he was so well respected by St. Louis sports media, the Cards in particular, that I think that was why his promotion allowed no funny business. There were no ridiculous angles. It was pure athletics, kind of like an upgraded Eddie Graham, Florida. And Ev, we had a blast. I mean, Evan was there. I think he got in a week early to help me out. I spent like 14 months trying to make this thing worthy of Sam Munchnick. And, you know, we had everybody from Teddy DiBiase Sr. to Bob Backlund, and just tons and tons of talent. Ev, any of your thoughts on, and then we'll get into this because it's fun and it's good to continually get the wrestling fans' thoughts, because they were the ones that brought Ron Killings, R-Truth, back. It was none of this stuff like I love how Triple H was trying to cover it up and say, oh, this was planned all along. No, TKO let him go. But Ev, let me throw to you, because St. Louis, just incredible territory. Although Jeremy's gone all over North America to talk to fans for the books, the 2 books.
Yeah, Doctor, I'd be curious your take on modern wrestling fans. I mean, Mike was talking about Sam Muchnick. That goes back for 40 years. But
Sure.
Today, I've met some of the closest friends in my life through pro wrestling. And there's others who are just obsessives and tribalistic, and, you know, they know nothing but wrestling, and they're like a pounding in your head.
But it's the tribalism
Yeah.
that we've brought up. We've brought up the tribalism a lot on this show.
Sure.
It's a common theme.
Which is a shame. Why can't you love all wrestling? All wrestling. I mean, TNA, I went to that house show, got to shoot front row, and it was a blast. The one in LA just about a month ago. It was a blast. I hadn't been to TNA show. All of the MLW, absolutely incredible. They're all great, but there does get to be a saturation point in terms of television, not house shows. I think people could, attend XYZ.
But we're talking more about the tribalism element of it, and I wanted to know what your thought was, Jeremy.
You know, you bring up a good point, because I look at sports overall now as being very tribalistic. And it's really turned me off of going to. I used to be a season ticket holder for the Kansas City Chiefs. I'm been a diehard Chiefs fan since I was 10 years old. So
boo as a Niners fan. Boo as a Niners fan.
I'm not one of the bandwagon guys who just jumped on when Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce took over. I've been there through the the very lean years.
Russ, we
at
watched
Arrowhead.
when Joe Montana went there. I mean,
Yes.
that's when I started becoming a fan because, okay, I want to see Joe.
Oh, I go all
miss
the way
Joe.
back to when Jim Plunkett was quarterback for the 49ers. But that you know, and O.J. Simpson was on the team. So, you know, those are really dark times if you were a 49ers fan, for sure.
Yeah. You know, but I've just, it's tough for me to go to live events as a fan anymore because of the tribalism. And, you know, it's one thing to be a rival, you know, the Chiefs Raiders, the Chiefs Broncos. I grew up with those as my rivals. Cardinals Cubs, you know, that's a huge rival. But it seems like sports overall now has gotten into this tribalistic mentality that if you're not supporting the team that is the home team, that gives the fans a right to not only just harass you, but physically assault people at times. And it's really turned me off from going to the events, whether that be just the mix of the tribalism with the alcohol that is served at these events, or just the tribalism within itself. I find it hard to stomach going to a lot of the live events now because of that. I mean, I'm a huge college football fan, and the one reason I enjoy going to Notre Dame to watch the Irish is because, you know, they don't serve alcohol in the stadium. And so the fans may get drunk before the game, but when they're in the stadium, especially at Notre Dame, it's a very prestigious, and the fans there treat the opposing fans very respectfully. But yet you go to some place like the Big House, and you wear Notre Dame colors going into the Big House, you're taking your life in your own hands, just like going to an Eagles game wearing Cowboys colors or something like that. And it shouldn't be that way. You know, I'm all for giving each other a little, you know, razzing each other a little bit and all good spirits, but it's gotten out of hand. It's
Here in New York,
for the referees. Save it for the refs.
Here in New York, we when we were playing the Pacers, we had a New York fireman wearing a Pacers jersey, and they were literally throwing garbage at him, and it had this bad, you know, like mob mentality kind of vibe to it. And I was, as a New Yorker, a lifelong New Yorker, I was ashamed. It's like, you know, this doesn't represent me. And I go back, you know, decades. I was in Boston with a buddy of mine. He was going on med school interviews, speaking of doctors. And he was at Harvard, actually. And I just tossed on a Knicks sweatshirt. I didn't even think about it because it's something I was wearing at the time. And we go into this bar, and a guy walks up to me. He goes, "You have a lot of nerve wearing that here." I'm like, you know, like 30 years later, I remember this. It was unpleasant. You know, I'm not looking for a fist fight. I didn't even realize I had the thing on, you know, and it's just unnecessary and childish. And I don't get it, honestly. I mean, these are billion-dollar corporations with, you know, multimillionaire players, and regular working folk want to start fights with people over it. It's makes no sense.
Well, isn't that true of wrestling now with TKO, multi-billion-dollar, and making some of these money-only decisions that, or, you know, and the ticket prices, people really bitched about Vegas this year, and with good reason. And now they're going back, you know, they dumped New Orleans for Vegas to go back for WrestleMania next year. And a family cannot afford much of anything. So they're going to the free Busted Open events or the minimal cost Mickey James fashion shows, or the great indies. You know, everybody in there on the planet is there. One thing, I'll be very brief. My grandfather, you know, luckily supplied the spirits for Dodger Stadium and the Dodgers in the 60s. And we got to have, he would take me as a kid, sit behind home plate, and I would specifically really want to see the Dodgers play San Francisco, even before I moved up to San Francisco with my wife. And to see Willie Mays, Koufax and Drysdale pitch to Willie Mays, or any of the other amazing players, I was in awe of them And I would never think of booing an opposing team, but
I'll tell you a quick story because you guys are all sports fans. As a kid, I'm at Shea Stadium, and the Pirates are playing the Mets, and Bob Moose is pitching a no-hitter, and Roberto Clemente makes a diving catch to save the game, and the Met fans were rooting for the no-hitter because that's special. And I don't know if you would have that today. There's such venom, one team against the other team. And the wrestling fans, it's like they're soldiers in an imaginary WWE versus AEW war. And they wake up in the morning and they're attacking Tony Khan, or, it doesn't make sense to me, honestly, any of it.
Well, and I think back from when we were all younger, all of us have been involved in wrestling for so long that it was so hard to find wrestling. You were just happy to find wrestling of any variety, of any type. It was like, you were happy to, like, finding like an old porn magazine underneath your parents' bedroom or something like that. You're like, at least it's all you had. It's all you could find. So you enjoyed what you could see. And now it's like, just, hey, yes, I like Hostess cupcakes once in a while, but I don't like to have one shoved in my mouth every day, and that's all I'm eating. And wrestling has just gotten so omnipresent. There's so much of it that it's the selectivity part of it. I mean, you can't be like Mike and watch all of it. Lord knows he tries. And he's retired.
I tried. I kind of fast forwarded through because I was one of only 2 photographers allowed, because I actually worked for Antonio Pena for the very first AAA pay-per-view when Worlds Collide. Long story on that. I don't have to get into, but so I watched. I was pissed that Legado de Fantasma won over arguably 3 of the greatest baby faces, main event tier baby faces, like Psycho Clown and some of the others. But that match, having the WWE guys go over, that kind of didn't make sense because these 3 guys are way bigger stars. But, whatever. I think that was the only one really where WWE talent went over in NXT versus AEW. I don't know. But let's get into the book, because tell us now, you spent a lot of time for the first book traveling the country, but even more so now. So how is this book different? What were some more of the great characters that you met, the really impassioned fans?
So with the second book, I really got the motivation to write it because the first chapter of the second book was supposed to be the final chapter of the first book. And that is about this group called the Wrestling Club out of Brooklyn. A teacher named Victor Perry, who teaches at KIPP Academy, started a group for his 7th grade students where they literally get together and watch pro wrestling on lunch and after school. And it's really a great program. It keeps a lot of these kids off the streets and gives them gives them a reason to go to school and to keep their grades up and to stay out of trouble. And when I heard about the club, midway through writing the first book, I reached out, and he's a tough guy to get a hold of. He was very busy with not only teaching, but he also does music in his free time. And so when he finally got back to me, I had to reach out to the school then to get their permission. And that was another chore within itself. So I decided to go ahead and put out the first book with the chapters that I had. I felt like I had plenty. And table the Wrestling Club for what I thought was going to be just a website article. And once he reached out to me, actually, it was funny. He reached out to me, I think, the second week that the first book was in release. So he just missed pretty much, by about a month or two being in the first book. So when he reached out, we set up a time to chat. And I think he called me on like a Thursday night, and we talked for about 4 or 5 hours. And it was a great conversation. And So immediately I knew that this was going to have to be a sequel. But I wanted to take a different stance with this one, where the first one is my story and then 6 other stories about how pro wrestling has impacted our lives. I wanted this second book to be about stories of pro wrestling fans and how they are using pro wrestling to positively impact it could be their city, their, the lives of others, or even their own life. So I wanted all the stories to be very positive and inspirational. And so that's what I went for with this second book. And it took me a while to find some of these stories. A lot of them I stumbled across. I know one, I stumbled across a video on YouTube, about a 30-second clip. And it was a woman in Sacramento who is battling stage 4 kidney cancer. And she adopted the motto, "Just keep fighting," from Kevin Owens. And while she was at a show, Kevin Owens literally left the ring, climbed up the stands into the crowd, gave her a hug, and signed a shirt for her. And it was just a cool moment to see. And I immediately knew that I had to talk to her. And she was actually the last person that I talked to for the second book. And it's kind of interesting. I still keep in touch with a few of the people from the first book, but all 11 stories from the second book, I keep in touch with those individuals all on a regular basis. I'd say I talk to at least 1 or 2 of them every week. And so it's, not only have I been able to tell their stories, but I've become friends with all of them. And it's been really cool to have that, transpire because of the book.
And of course, we're talking about your second book, For the Love of the Show 2, More Stories from Pro Wrestling Fans by Dr. Jeremy Housewright. Quickly, Evan, weren't you one of the first instructors, major instructors, to give a course on pro wrestling?
We did a pro wrestling appreciation class as a 3 p.m. elective at a junior high school I was working at. And we brought Nikolai Volkov and Johnny Valiant and all kinds of indie wrestlers, and the kids loved it. And this is going back 20, 25 years. And as critical as I've been of WWE and some of their ruthlessness, they were actually quite supportive of the program and would send different merchandise and stuff for the kids. And it was nice while it lasted. It was interesting. I mean, the wrestlers are these big tough guys, and they're trying to maintain control of 20 excited kids. So it was interesting. It was an experience, and it was positive for the most part. Yeah.
Jeremy, what kind of feedback? Then I'll throw to Russ. What kind of feedback from book 1 and now book 2 have you gotten from the fans when they've actually read your books?
Book 1, the one
they were interviewed, really.
The one criticism I received for book 1 was they wanted more photos. So, because with book 1, I only had 1 photo of each person. And mainly the reason because of that was my first book. And I didn't really have a full grasp of what I was doing at the time. With book 2, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I took full control of it. Book 1, I'd hired an editor, and I did not like the job that he did. And
Evan can sing a long story about editors, and
so book 2, I handled everything myself, and that's the way I wanted it. And it was a lot of work. There's a lot of work, but that's I knew that if I wanted it a certain way, I had to do it. I had to have full control of it. And so I wound up putting 3 photos of each person in the second book. And that made formatting a real bear. I will tell you, I spent easily 30 to 40 hours just trying to format the book the first time that I did the formatting, and that, and I had 4 editing sessions after that. So it was a chore to format those photos and get them exactly the way I wanted them to make the book look good and all that. So, but the feedback has been great. I just had a signing at a Barnes and Noble Saturday,
Oh,
and it went really well. It was very cool to see, teenage girls coming up and buying the book because they said the cover looked interesting, or their dads watch pro wrestling, so they wanted to find a way to talk to their dads and have something in common with their dads. Uh, so that was really cool. And, I even had some married women who picked up the book because their husbands were big wrestling fans, and they thought that the stories looked really cool, and they wanted to read them themselves and then give the book to the husband for Father's Day. So, it was a really great experience finally. And that's the one thing that I really wanted to do with the second book, is get it out to non-wrestling fans. And that's been the biggest challenge. The wrestling fans are always going to be there. I'm doing a signing at a Wrestleverse in Kansas City at the end of the month, and Sting's going to be there, Lex Luger, a bunch of the WCW vets, and some AEW guys are going to be there. I know the wrestling fans will buy the book. But with the second book, that's why I went for the inspirational stories, and I really wanted to find those motivational stories, is because I wanted it to appeal to those fans who are just reading fans. They're just fans of books and literature, and they may not know a damn thing about wrestling, but they're still going to read my book because they think it looks interesting. So that's what I was really going for with this book. And so far, those who have read it, they really enjoy it.
great, Russ.
Oh yeah, well, I wanted to, the general like knock on wrestling fans is that they're all just these slobbering, toothless, unwashed, gullible idiots that believe everything that they see in the ring is real, and they're incapable of higher thought and anything like that. And while yes, you will run into those fans every once in a while, there are them, but they're everywhere you look. I mean, it's the cross section of society. There's also a number of erudite and intellectually like elevated individuals. I mean, Evan is not what you would consider your drooling mouth fan, and certainly Mike is not, one of those. And I myself am an attorney, and I know a lot of other people who are very advanced, but they're also wrestling fans. What do you have to say about that, and like what your idea is with why people of all these different levels of capacity are huge wrestling fans?
That's a great question. That's something that I get asked fairly often here lately, and something that I thought about when I was writing this book, because I also don't consider myself I guess here in St. Louis they'd call him a Hoosier, or something like that, or I just like great stories, and I think that's what attracts a lot of people to pro wrestling, is when it's done well. It's a captivating story, and I can point to WrestleMania, the WrestleMania with Cody finishing the story. I thought that was probably one of the best storylines in pro wrestling I've seen in a number of years. It just had a little bit of everything. You had not only Cody's story with, his father, but then you throw in the bloodline story with it. And it was like every week you had to tune in to see what was going to happen. And then you throw a guy like Paul Heyman into it, who is just a little egocentric and out there. It was you did. I really didn't know what to expect come WrestleMania night. I thought Cody would win, but I'm like, you never know. With WWE, sometimes they just like to thumb their nose at the fans and keep the belt on the champion, even though everyone's rooting for Cody. So
That's right now with Moxley, though.
Yeah, yeah. You know, I kind of feel that way with Cena right now too. I
Yeah,
just
it's true.
he's hard to
Both
watch.
guys in their respective promotions are quote unquote trying to ruin wrestling.
You know, John Cena, I'll give him his credit. He had one of the best runs I've seen in the last 50 years of a face, um, probably since Hogan in WWF. But it's hard to watch him right now because you can tell that he's not what he was, and he was never a great in-ring guy anyway. But man, last night just watching him, it was like he can't even throw a punch. It's like he doesn't want to take a bump. It's tough, and I know that Triple H says he's earned the right to go out the way he wants, but at what point do you got to draw the line?
Well, we've made it halfway through the year, so I guess we're we're almost at
Well, they have
SummerSlam.
X amount of dates unless they just throw that out the window. But he, I don't know. This year, Jeremy talked about those two great converging stories, Bloodline, which kind of is fizzled for the moment, and Cody's story. Although I have disagreement because I think Evan knows this too. Dusty won the NWA world title, which was far more of a big deal and respected than, the Tri-WF title, except for when it was on Bruno and Morales and Backlund. But that was not, and Superstar Graham, but that was not the title. That was a regional title because Vince Sr. joined back the NWA, and he would go to their Vegas meetings. So Cody had won the NWA title, as well, like even before the formation of AEW. So,
right.
It was for those of us with some history chops, like myself and Evan, that was kind of silly, but it was, very magical. And it's been the shits, pardon my language, ever since, with The Rock not going to Mania and all of the stuff that happened to Cody and the ridiculous bad finish with, what's the rap guy, Lamar?
Travis Scott,
I'm sorry. Travis Scott, poor substitute for The Rock, can't throw a punch to save his life. That was ridiculous. And so now we're not seeing that kind of great storytelling. Paul Heyman's got to start all over again with the Seth Rollins group. I was bummed to see Seth. I haven't watched the pay-per-view yet to hear that he won instead of somebody that needs some oomph. At least Naomi got it for the women's side, but why is Seth getting it again? He's the top player out of the six there, the top main event name. Why not give it to one of the other guys to elevate them, put a rocket ship on them? Let me ask, before I forget this thought, in different types of fans, as Russ was talking about, and I've seen all kinds of spectrums, Evan's even seen more, but there are X amount in the world of blind pro wrestling fans that can get the vibrations. So there are blind and deaf, but particularly blind wrestling fans that can enjoy it as well from the descriptions, whether it was in my day, Gordon Soley, who painted the perfect picture, or Dick Lane or something like that, to now, where they say when they go to the arena and they can feel the vibrations, that makes up for what they're not able to see. Have you encountered some of that too? And
yeah, you bring up a great point because I was actually an assistant principal at Missouri School for the Blind for 2 years. And one thing that I was starting to get involved with right before I left was a group called the Mind's Eye. And they take blind individuals to sporting events, and they give them essentially a play-by-play of what's going on. And AEW, when they come to St. Louis, they work with them. So I've seen a number of blind individuals at the last few AEW shows here in St. Louis. Now, to my knowledge, WWE does not do that. And I think they're missing the boat there. But I'll be honest, I don't think they really care. So it'd be nice if they did, because there's a lot of blind individuals who are very into pro wrestling, and I think they'd enjoy it greatly. So yeah, I have experienced that. I think it's a great thing to see. I think it's pretty cool when you see a blind kid enjoying pro wrestling or any sport for that matter. Like it's nothing out of the ordinary for them.
But Jeremy, I know it's late where you are. Are you able to go a couple of minutes more?
I can go along. Yeah, I'm good. Yeah.
All right, let's throw back to Ev and/or.
What do you see as the big difference between old school fans? I started attending in 1974, and today's fans, because we were basically a blue collar mock audience, and every time Bruno or Pedro or whomever got kicked or punched, we felt it. And I tell people, for example, my father was a World War II vet, and there's Waldo von Erich and Baron von Raschke and Hans Schroeder and Otto von Heller, and it was a very different vibe back then. Today, the fans seem smartened up. They're 5,000 shoot interviews in and 500 wrestling books in, and I think it's a very different mentality. What's your take on all of this?
I think a lot of that is because we don't have the modern fan of today. One, I think it's a lot more, especially with WWE, it's a lot more kids, and it's more about the merchandise. And we don't have a chance to develop that relationship with that wrestler. Besides, and again, I point back to Cody. I think that's what made Cody's rise in WWE when he came back so great, is because we could all relate to losing our job and then having to build our way back up, or being the underdog. You don't see that. And, I relate back to when I was a kid with Hulk Hogan. The way they marketed him was like he was, say your prayers, train, eat your vitamins, which we all know was total bullshit, and total opposite of what the real person is. But we still, as kids, felt, when I was growing up, we felt like we had that connection to Hogan. You don't see that as much anymore. And I think that's a big part of it. You have a guy like Jey Uso who, as over as he is right now, I could easily see in 2 months him being back to the mid card, or being back to a tag team with his brother, and not being the big time flavor of the month like he is right now, because that's the marketing machine that they have built, in the last few years.
Wait a minute. What about Dusty? Speaking of Cody and Dusty's Hard Times promo, arguably one of the greatest promos that brought people in, yes. And he related to the every man, every woman. It's absolutely incredible stuff, and it gets the goosebumps going. Some of those great promos, the stuff I was blessed to see with Tolis and Blassie, or even Bruno, simple interviews with Bruno and Pedro Morales, or any of these guys. They were all such great interviews. And if they weren't, they had amazing managers, that plethora that, would bring people in. Even Arnie Skoland is a babyface manager. I mean, who thought that would ever get over? And that lasted through all of Bruno and Backlund's eras, both of them. It was just amazing, because I kind of miss that, but I still, AEW still has some managers. WWE basically, but it's really just Heyman, the top ever.
Yeah, I think that, I look at, even if I go back to when I was a kid, Jake the Snake Roberts, I always loved his promos. They were dark. But while they were very dark, they weren't totally evil either. It's just like you could feel the intensity. And it's hard to find that today. Honestly, it is. It's hard for me to get excited about individual wrestlers anymore.
Well, Jeremy, should I just call you Dr. Jeremy or Jeremy?
You call me Jeremy.
Okay. Jeremy. What is your doctorate in?
Education administration.
Okay, it still hurts when I do this, though.
He wants some free medical advice.
I can't help you. Don't want my medical advice.
So what I was going to say is that, there's this general, well, first of all, humans love to see prearranged combat situations.
Sure.
There's just a certain fundamental thing that we find entertaining as a human species about watching people rehearse and act out violent situations without actually really getting killed.
Sure.
That's something that if to argue against that would be to argue against humanity's existence, as far as what at least a decent portion of humanity finds entertaining. And it's both men and women who are saying, it used to be such a guy thing to like wrestling. And now when you go to wrestling shows, you'll see women in the audience and girls that are, in younger than, and we've had them on the program.
Wait a minute, Russ. One thing for Jeremy, because Evan knows who these guys are. Every major city used to have a hat pin Mary that would stick the guys. This is back in the 60s, early 70s. There's no more of that now, with disbelief going out the window. Any thoughts from Ev or Jeremy on that? Where fans were so up in arms, and it was in Boston.
That was my great grandmother was one of those.
Oh, well, there was one in Boston who stabbed with I think a knitting needle, Evan, Blackjack Mulligan in 71, where it was like 240 stitches in his leg.
No, that was a drunk guy who did it.
No, that was a guy who attacked Mulligan, and
with a knife.
That was a serious injury. But we had at the Garden Georgette Krieger, I believe her name was, and she looked like a sweet old lady, and it was like Ruth Buzzy. She'd hit the wrestler with the pocketbook.
Yes.
And she was part of the show. She was always in like the same seat, and the wrestlers knew her, and the heels got her riled up, and it was fun. And one day she was on the back page of the Daily News or whatnot. So she was like a celebrity in New York. And but once Vince went full circus, Vince Jr., it was you didn't see her anymore, and it was a whole different vibe there. It was more like a hip chic, like Andy Warhol type scene. Yeah. It was different. It was different. Yeah.
Well, now when you have to pay, $3,000 for a ringside seat, it's a lot different.
Well, let me throw this out. Let me throw this out to Dr. Jeremy. I think, and I have this theory. You could tell me if you think it's crazy or not. I think with the waning of religion, a lot of atheism and such in America and throughout the world to a degree, I think I've heard geniuses go, WWE is my religion. I've heard people say this, grown men, and they'll say, Vince is my hero. He's a great American. Yeah. And, it's like, to me, it's absurd, but it's there. And I think some of these pay-per-views where you're paying five figures to see a mediocre WWE pay-per-view, it's almost like a religious pilgrimage. What do you think, Doc?
You bring up a great point that I was just talking about this morning with a friend. There's that old saying that I heard a lot, and I don't want to talk politics, but during the election or when the Michael Brown thing was going on here in St. Louis in 2014, 15-ish, and athletes started kneeling during the anthem. You heard a lot of people bitching and complaining, keep politics out of our sports. We don't want to mix sports and politics. Well, last night, I turned on the UFC pay-per-view after WWE, and guess who is cage side once again? Donald Trump. And them same people who bitch about keeping politics out of sports are applauding this man and giving him fist bumps and cheering him. And I'm thinking, how damn hypocritical is this? Like, do people not see how big of hypocrites they are by going along with this bull crap? I mean, and it turns me off totally. Like I was a huge MMA fan. I can hardly stomach it. Like, and last night was a great card for them. I mean, the female fight they had, and then bringing Nunez in afterward, that was a great moment. And that fight that they're going to have between Nunez when she comes back is going to probably be the biggest women's MMA fight of all time. That's my prediction. I mean, you just got two stand-up females who are great role models for young women, but then you have him sitting cage side. And I keep thinking, Amanda Nunez, who is, you know, an outspoken, you know, LGBTQ, to have to look at this guy, cage side, who your boss is great friends with. I can't imagine that sitting well with her.
Or maybe the opposite. Maybe
Just
it's
his
the opposite.
presence is it detracts from the athlete. Jeremy, I've got to go. My throat's starting to kill me. I wanted to just ask again, for the love of the show too, if you can tell folks where to get it. But who did that cover art? Because it's like a long shot of guys in the ring and the balcony. It's kind of etched in my memory from what I shot from arena to arena around the U.S. and Canada and Mexico and Japan. Who did that cover art? It's great.
I did.
Oh, you? Wow.
And I am not an artist at all. It's something that I designed using my iPad and just some art programs, Canva and things like that. And it just came to me, and I thought about, when I was thinking about the cover, I wanted to do something that reminded me of a modern day, like, gladiator type view. And so that's what came to me. And it turned out well, because I debated on going with that for a long time. That was one of the difficult decisions, because I had two other covers in mind that I thought about using. And it actually came down to, I was sitting in study hall with my high school students one day, and I laid all three covers. I said, I want you all to vote. I said, I don't care if you like wrestling or not, because half the girls didn't know what the hell I was talking about. But I said, I want you to vote on, if you were walking through a bookstore, which cover would get you to stop? And that was the cover that the majority of them picked. So that's what I went with.
It also has a real throwback look to it, you know, like you're watching a wrestling match from the 60s or like maybe early 70s, not like something that you'd see from like today's wrestling. Is that the aesthetic you were going for?
Yes. You know, I thought about wrestling at the Chase, and being friends with Herb Simmons, who is a huge historian here in St. Louis.
We've had him on the show.
That was one of the first things that came to my mind is, you know, I wanted it to replicate St. Louis wrestling history. So again, that was a big inspiration behind it.
Now, Mike's got to leave.
Guys, Russ and Evan, make sure he plugs all of his socials.
Yeah,
too.
we want to keep you on the show, even though Mike
can't. Even though I gotta go. For the love of the show too, as great as one was, this is even better. Save the artwork for books 3 and 4, and so on.
Right on.
There has to be more in the series.
There is something in the works. Yes, I can't.
There's always stories, right? There's always.
Well, I might be working with a legend from here in St. Louis on his biography. So that might be next.
Nice.
I'll just say you may see his son on a weekly basis if you watch WWE programming.
Well, hit me up for photos, because I have him his first rookie year in Florida, and then I have him in the PAFO promotion that I guess it was ICW, the Angelo PAFO. So the one we're talking about, he was all over the place well before. You know, the Vince big time. So kudos on that one, because that guy's a total legend. I know he's got some fantastic stories, and maybe stories of going to All Japan for Baba.
Yeah. Like I said, it's not set in stone yet, but it's kind of being talked about, and I'm a little hesitant to do it because I don't know if sitting down with him would be a big chore to.
Nah, he's mellowed. He's mellowed out so much. I see him every year. He used to bring his dad, who I was lucky enough to photograph all 3 generations of that. But his dad, who Evan will remember, was a big deal for Vince Sr. But John Tolis brought him in specifically because of their longtime friendship dating back to the 50s. And it was like his retirement. He recreated the gimmick, coming in with the mask as the Big O. And then, anyway, he's a great guy. He's really mellowed out. So don't have any fears. And I'll send you a ton of questions that I know will really get the most out of him if this thing happens for you. I hope it does.
All right. Awesome.
Very cool.
So that's Mike for this week. But please stay on, Dr. Jeremy, because we'd like to. I have more questions for you, and I'm sure Evan does too. I'd like to ask you about like the whole St. Louis territory, because I asked the same thing about Herb Simmons, about what makes. I mean, I've always felt like St. Louis is one of the great territories. Like when you think of and I'd like to think San Francisco was one, and of course New York was like the king of all the territories, or like the king of the world for a little while in wrestling. But I thought St. Louis always stood apart. What makes you think the fans of St. Louis, what makes them different than the other fans that you've met across the U.S.?
I can't say necessarily newer wrestling fans, but wrestling fans from probably the early 90s and beyond, St. Louis is a blue collar city. And we respect hard work. We respect history. You look at Cardinal fans. They are some of the greatest fans, and I'm not a Cardinal fan. I grew up a Cardinal fan, but I am no longer a St. Louis Cardinal fan. I'm a Royals fan. But I look at the history there, and same with St. Louis's football history, the Big Red, the St. Louis Cardinals football team, and you go back to like the basketball when the Spirit was here, and St. Louis Blues hockey. St. Louis fans, they will support anyone who's hardworking, regardless if they're winners or losers. If you go out there and you give it your all, and you treat people with respect, they will support you. And I think in regards to pro wrestling in St. Louis, a lot of the wrestlers had roots here. They developed relationships with people here. I can remember as a kid, a lot of the wrestlers going to this club called Pops, the bar called Pops, after shows and hanging out with whoever was there till the wee hours in the morning. I believe there was a well-known story about Mr. Perfect getting into a big bar fight there one night and causing just a huge melee at Pops on a Friday night. I think that's a big part of it is, Midwestern people, they're easy to get along with for the most part, especially here in St. Louis. It's generally a friendly town. And as long as you go out there and you're good to the fans who spend their hard-earned money to go, they will support you through thick and thin. And that's the big thing about St. Louis throughout the years that I've noticed is as long as you do that, the fans will not turn on you. Now, the instant you don't do that, a la Gary Templeton in the early 80s, they will send your ass out of town in a heartbeat, But that's why guys like Ozzie Smith and Albert Pujols are so well revered here in St. Louis. Even as much as he's a drunkard, Brett Hall too, for Blues fans, they love the guy. And he had, he won all his titles with Detroit and Dallas. So it's kind of funny that they love Brett Hall so much here when half of his career was elsewhere.
But so getting back to like what I was talking about before is like, why do you think like smart people love wrestling? It's easy to say, well, the barbaric side of the Neanderthals will always love watching people hit each other over the head, and the Three Stooges and slapstick humor, is just the lowest of lowbrow stuff, because that's exactly what my dad thought. My dad hated wrestling. However, my great grandmother was one of those Hatpin Mary types that stood on in San Francisco. We'd go and lap the guys with the purse, and all the ushers knew her and all that stuff. She was the West Coast version of that. So it skipped a couple generations, and my dad was always horrified that I loved wrestling so much, and always was like, "Can't you love the opera as much as you love wrestling?" I'm like,
Sure.
No. The answer to that is no. And
Right.
and so what are your thoughts to that, and why you find fans that are, that don't fit that typical mold of what, the general perception is of.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, because my mom was just telling me today, she goes, "I wish you'd write a book about something other than wrestling." And she goes, "All the different things you've covered, you've interviewed presidents, this and that, and you write a book about pro wrestling. You write 2 books about pro wrestling. Write something else." And, I guess the reason I am a fan is it's an escape for me. I can go to a show and I immediately go back to when I was a kid and had no worries other than, is Hulk Hogan going to beat King Kong Bundy in a steel cage?
I was at that match.
I write in the first book how I cried that night because I thought King Kong Bundy killed Hulk Hogan on Saturday night. I think it was Saturday night's main event when he squashed him. And it's things like that I'll never forget. It's my grandfather taking me to the Kiel Auditorium, and us paying $5 for a ticket and sitting up in the nosebleeds and this is back when Brutus the Barber and Jimmy Snuka were with WWF. And my grandpa was not a wrestling fan, although he got to see Gorgeous George several times. He would just laugh. We would sit up there and we would laugh. We would talk about whatever was going on in our lives. I would tell him about my day at school, and he would tell me about his day welding something at work. And it was just time that we spent together. And I always think about those times when I go to a show, and it has changed a lot. And I can remember the last match we went to together I was 16 years old, and it was a WCW pay-per-view here in St. Louis, and it was a horrible show. I couldn't even tell you the main event. I know that Goldberg was on it. I think Bret the Hitman Hart was there at the time, but it was just a boring show. And it had, back then it had all the explosions and all that. And my grandpa just sat there and he goes, "This isn't fun." He goes, Did you enjoy this shit?" And I go, "No, I really didn't care for this show." He goes, "Yeah, it was terrible." He goes, "I don't think I'll come back." And he never did. And I can remember ever since then, he passed away about 6 years ago. But when he found out I was still going to shows and shooting photography or doing whatever, he'd always ask me, why do you watch that crap? It's not like it used to be." And, he's right. He is right. It's not like it used to be. But I guess I still think back to the way it used to be, and it takes me back to those times when I don't have to think about what I got going on the next day at work, or the bills I might have, or the coworkers I might not be able to stand.
Well, if you're like me and you're like Evan, you recognize that the effort is there in the ring.
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing guys like Will Ospreay, who was really busting his freaking ass every week to entertain people. I mean, really putting his body on the line. He's like the new Sabu in a lot of ways, you know. I mean, if he makes it to 45, I'll be amazed. And, somehow these guys are wrestling in their 60s. I don't know how they managed to do it. But, and these guys are really like putting themselves on the line, but they're involved in storylines or in things that like the way the promotion is pushing them, that doesn't get them anywhere. And they just, the kind of, at least on the WWE side of the flavor of the week thing, has been so pressed into what the WWE has done. Yeah, you could say, well, Roman Reigns was around for 400 something days as champion, but he only defended the belt like 40 times in 400 days. So it really wasn't the same kind of thing. You know, that same engagement of like a guy defending his title against all comers constantly in shows across the United States where people could say they saw him live, you know. I mean, despite what you want to say about Hulk Hogan, you know, he did that. But certainly, like in the past, guys like Ric Flair and Bruno Sammartino, you know, wrestled all over the place every day of the week, pretty much. You know, the 350 days that Evan has on his hat there. And so people don't have that live connection with wrestlers that they had back in the day. What's your thought about that?
You're precisely right. I mean, I can remember going to so many house shows, and I think I enjoyed those more than the live shows because you got to get closer to the performers, and they broke character a lot. I can remember when I was in high school, that's when the Attitude Era was huge. And I can remember going to house shows when DX, you know, Triple H and Road Dogg and Billy Gunn and Sean Waltman would all be in the ring together, and they would it'd be like going to a rock concert. They would be, women would be flashing them. I mean, it blew my mind. As a 16-year-old kid, I was in heaven. I'm like, this is great. This is better than anything I've ever seen. You don't see that anymore because the interaction that you can have with those guys isn't there when it's a live event. And it's gotten so overblown that it's become all about filling every single seat in the arena and less about the experience that the fan is having. And that's what I really detest about TKO. I covered the last WWE PLE that was in St. Louis last month, Backlash, the Orton Cena main event. And there was a few media members who came in from out of town. And my whole thing going in, I wanted to hear people's opinions on what they thought about the current product, like other media members that frequently cover. And, you know, Van Fleet was there, and he rarely says anything negative about WWE, which, whatever, that's his prerogative. But it was very refreshing while we were standing around to hear so many of the media say, these ticket prices are ridiculous. Like, we cannot afford to take our family. And I'm thinking, yeah, I was telling them, I'm like, when I would pay for a WWE show, a PLE or a pay-per-view is what they used to call it, you know, I would sit in the 100 level, not on the floor, but right off the floor. And I'd pay maybe $100 for a ticket. And I was cool with that. I had a great time. That $100 now won't even get me into the arena. And that's a shame because you're marking out, you're singling out a longtime fan. And I know there's more people like me who couldn't, if they wanted to, couldn't afford to get a decent seat where they usually sit. And that's, to me, that's a shame. And
let me make 2 quick points. One, I've seen more and more fathers online saying, I'm really sad and even ashamed to look my kid in the eye and say, I can't afford to take you anymore to a WWE show. Yeah. 2, at these press scrums, when Triple H boasts about a record-breaking gate after jacking up the prices obscenely, the media applaud.
Right.
So to me, that's not unbiased media. These guys are shilling for WWE, and I rarely hear any tough questions at these.
And then 2 days later, R-Truth is let go and Carlito is let go because they need to save money on contracts.
But they bring Nikki Bella back.
Yeah.
Come on.
I mean, I would, see, I'm not a huge WWE fan. I mean, I'm senior editor over Pro Wrestling Stories, and you know, we have millions of readers every month. I don't even ask for press comps to WWE because I don't want to sit through a 6-hour show or whatever. So, but if I were there and Triple H did the record-breaking gate spiel, I would say, do you ever have any intentions of setting up a fund to help your legends and pioneers who die penniless and need GoFundMes to be buried? And I don't know how that would go over at a press scrum, you know?
That would be interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I still get, I was getting comped to almost any show I wanted to go to because I shoot photography on the side. So I would go just for shooting photos. And the last show, because normally they'll sit me right next to the hard cam. And I shoot from there. I bring about a 300 to 400 lens, and I'll shoot, and I'll get great shots. This time they made me shoot from all the way up top of the arena in the press box because they filled. It's like you're really nickel and diming that much that you can't give someone who's covered you guys for 10 years here, who you tell me, they told me their exact words were, "You always take care of us. We're going to set you up great next time." And you put me up in the very top of the place on the roof to where my photos look like ants. Like, that was a slap in the face to me. And I told a lot of the media, I'm like, I don't think I'm going to do this anymore because it's kind of ruined the enjoyment. And it's been hard for me to watch. That's the reason I don't watch as much anymore, because to think of TKO just nickel and diming people, it makes me sick. And it's hard for me to stomach, you know. So it's really gotten tough to enjoy the product a little bit because of that.
I'm going as press July 20th to the TNA pay-per-view in New York, and I'll see what that experience is like.
Yeah.
I enjoy the AEW pay-per-views, but you know, you get there like 5:30, 6 o'clock, and it's wrapping up around midnight. It's a long, long day.
Yes.
And I think they almost give you too much, you know.
Yes.
Absolutely. Dr. Jeremy Housewright, we have absolutely loved having you on the show. And why don't you take a moment to give our fans your information as far as your social media and how they can get copies of the book, both books.
Sure. Yeah, you could find me on Facebook, Instagram, Dr. Jeremy M. Housewright. My website, jeremyhousewright.com. And you can get my book there. You can get my book on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, pretty much anywhere for the second book. The first book is only on Amazon. Or if you want to email me, jeremy.housewright@gmail.com, I can sign a copy and I'll ship it out to you through media mail, free of charge. And yeah, so those are the best ways to reach me.
That's fantastic. And absolutely, when you have another book coming up or anything that you want to promote, we'd love to have you on the show again. I think you're a brilliant mind about professional wrestling, and I really don't say that just lightly, throwing that around. In the 269 guests that we've had on this show, I think you're in that top percentile of the people that understands what's going on with what we watch and what we're involved in, the industry we're involved in. So really wanted to tell you I appreciate your perspective on that, and look forward to having you again on future shows. And Evan, quickly promote your book.
Wrestling Rings, Blackboards, and Movie Sets, 100 Stories about juggling 3 careers as a teacher, as a film producer, and also I've been an agent, publicist. I've even done some heel managing and wrestling on the indies, etc., so on. And it's 100 stories, and some of the subjects are right behind me. That's Richard Pryor. And why are Richard Pryor and John Lennon here? I'll tell you a 30-second version, Doc. I walk out of Madison Square Garden, December 8, 1980. Bruno wrestling Sergeant Slaughter on top. Backlund was in Japan. Rare show Backlund wasn't on. I walk out of the garden that night, and there's this really bad vibe in the air. And I walk up to an absolute stranger. You could feel it in the air. And I go, "What happened?" He goes, "John Lennon was just shot." Yeah. And we had just come out of wrestling around 11 o'clock at night from the garden. And the garden, for those who don't know, is like 34th Street and 8th Avenue, and John Lennon was shot on 72nd Street. It wasn't even that far away. So yeah, so I tell that's one of the 100 stories in the book, and yeah, so and there's actually a super fan in my book. I don't know if you knew Georgie Ann Macropolis. She did the Wrestling Chatterbox. She was kind of like the den mother of pro wrestling, and all the wrestlers knew her and asked for advice. So Georgie Ann has a massive heart attack. She's 67 years old. I go to her wake. In one hand, there's a photo of Bruno. In the other hand, there's a photo of Buddy Rogers. And that's how she went to eternity. True story.
Wow.
True story.
I read some of your book while I was writing the second book. So I really enjoyed some of the stories. I didn't get through all of them yet, but
thank you.
I
Needed
something to
all right,
read while
fellas.
I was writing.
Have to wrap it up, but thank you so
Okay.
much for being on the show.
Yeah,
and
thanks so
talk to
much.
you guys again soon. Good night, everyone.
Thanks
Good
so
night.
much. Good night, everybody.